Welcome to the Situational Awareness and Ground Truth presentation. Jim, am I sounding okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Welcome everybody this evening. Glad to have you with us for this session of the New England Division Aries Academy. And I got Rob Macedo here, KD1CY, myself, Jim Palmer, KB1KQW. Going to be taking you through situational awareness and ground truth over the next hour. Just a couple of housekeeping items before Rob gets started. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar, and we'll be answering those questions as we go through the presentation. There's also a chat feature for some more general Q&A, but please keep your questions in the Q&A box wherever possible. If time allows, we'll try to have some live Q&A towards the end. But otherwise, at this point, I'll turn it over to Rob. He'll start off the presentation.
All right. Well, so what we'll cover here today is basically how emergency management and other governmental entities utilize amateur radio beyond normal message handling. So I think one of the things in amateur radio is we've often sold ourselves as being there when all else fails, and that does definitely still happen. However, we need to have other ways to really be able to be connected with our agencies. And one of these ways is by gathering that situational awareness, sometimes also referred to here as disaster intelligence information on ongoing situations, and being able to provide that situation reporting, situational awareness that many agencies crave in various situations. You know, and obviously one of the biggest ways that this happens is during severe weather, and through good cooperation and coordination with a good solid presence with your National Weather Service Skywarn program, with emergency management, though it doesn't always have to be weather. You know, for example, one area which is very similar from a damage assessment and other perspectives is earthquakes. Sometimes widespread cascading power outages. Sometimes local communities don't necessarily know that their neighboring communities are equally impacted when you have a large cascading power outage situation. And sometimes even more local incidents around wildfires that start local and then spread out of control to larger areas. Things of that nature all can be very important from a situational awareness perspective. Now, here in New England, one of the biggest things that I think constantly gets proven time and time again where the situational awareness reporting is important is during severe weather situations. And it's Skywarn and it's spotting, but it's also sharing that data with many other agencies. And we're going to talk through that as we go through the presentation here today. You know, so basically how amateur radio, we say MCOM, we've really kind of gotten away from that now. We're really talking about ARES, RACES, Skywarn, MARS, all the various groups can support situational awareness through government to government officials and how it applies in various ways. The importance of interoperability and the usage of amateur radio to share that information across all disaster agencies. So there's a lot of roles for us here. Should we choose to accept them? So weather reporting, damage assessment, both in a situation and after a situation has passed. Monitoring critical resources and critical infrastructures. You know, some amateur operators, when we had Irene affect our area almost 9 years ago, talked a little bit about how it would be good to have monitoring of what gas stations are open, what department stores are open, what grocery stores are open, convenience stores, etc. Because you think cities and towns may have some idea of that, but not fully. And this is an area that we can provide situational awareness. This is after, during, and really after the storm has passed. So things of that nature. Then obviously the communication resource augmentation and communications infrastructure support. Amateur radio operators, we can do a lot from gathering information, both in hurricanes and other situations. Obviously, by getting Skywarn trained by a local weather service office. As an ARES operator, you know, we receive or sometimes observe ourselves and receive damage and weather-related information. And it's important for the National Weather Service, but it's also important to other agencies to gather that larger situational awareness picture during an event. There are a lot of our natural dispersion provides information that they may not get from any other method. Our ability to coalesce information from other sources, from other entities, through modern social media, through other avenues that we have or have access to, are sometimes really important during these types of situations to give a better situational awareness picture across the board. And there's a lot of examples of data sharing that can be done across various means, and it happens with different agencies. It can even go all the way up to Federal Emergency Management Agency through the local regional weather service offices and the national prediction centers, such as the National Hurricane Center, Storm Prediction Center, local and state emergency management, and non-governmental organizations. We, for example, some of our weather spotter reports that we collect, yes, they go into the National Weather Service, but we share that across other agencies. We share that across the media. And that data gets promulgated by the media, by other agencies for their situational awareness. There's so many examples of this. There was an example of the Red Cross out in Central Mass responding to a fire from a house strike from lightning that they got from amateur radio Skywarn spotters. And I received an email about how critical that information was in knowing that was happening, and allowed them to scale their response so that they could actually be able to handle that situation and get a jump on it quicker than they would have otherwise. Obviously, we want to make sure we confirm and validate data. And again, it comes from a lot of sources. This is an information age. Everything is happening very quickly, but it can be good information. It can also be some not so good information. So it's important that we validate the information wherever we can. And sometimes it's getting the information from some sources and being able to get there and look at it ourselves visually. It sometimes can be confirming through multiple proper sources. So, for example, there could be cases where we can deploy amateur operators to critical infrastructures and sites that need monitoring. In a weather scenario, it could be certain rivers and streams if it's safe to do so, or it could be more critical infrastructure, such as things on the power grid or other infrastructure that may be need watching and looked at and monitored closely. Obviously, social media, there's a lot of information out there. We're going to actually talk about an example, and this is from an official social media source of some information and what we did to kind of try to corroborate that information. And it didn't quite go the way you thought it would, given the source of the information. And then obviously, we talk about this and it has to be done correctly, but monitoring our radio scanners, internet scanner feeds for information and data, collecting it, sourcing it, and then letting our folks within our leadership teams in the amateur radio side, working with partner agencies, ascertain more information about those situations can be extremely helpful in kind of characterizing the situation. But it has to be done properly, has to be done by making sure you're hearing what's actually happening on scene and so forth. As I said, this information can be very critical. The agencies only have so many people that can seek out this information, can validate this information. We can add our own support to these agencies by doing this work. The data is very distributed. And a lot of times we can do a very good job of centralizing data. And it can be some things that are very simple. One of the bullet items I have here is data from online weather stations. Well, tonight, and it's one of the reasons why I joined here about 2 minutes prior to the meeting is we have a hurricane net activation going on. And some of us are monitoring certain online weather stations that have received critical information that we've sent into the National Hurricane Center. Wind gusts of 92 miles an hour in Grand Isle, Louisiana, 97 miles an hour in another location in Louisiana. And in that same location, I believe it was Grove Meadow, Louisiana, also had a different weather station report wind gusts even higher than the station that we were monitoring. But this is all critical information, gives the forecasters and others high confidence on what's really happening on the ground in a given area. And as I mentioned, some of the stuff about critical infrastructure being open during and really post an event, how important that can be in a given situation. So, some examples of confirmation, validation of data, how we can help augment data that's out there. So, a number of examples here that we can talk through. Amateur radio, certainly with our non-governmental organizations, we support shelter communications, mass care activities, but damage assessment is another really critical area that we can support. And we're going to talk about an example very recently right here in New England, where that was one of the biggest things that we did and served. And that is really, I feel very strongly about this. Is something I've been passionate about, and I've done a presentation like this in different forms for a number of years. It's an area that can really connect us with agencies, even for smaller scale incidents. And then if you have a much larger scale incident that requires a much more massive response and the potential for communications to go down, this is our way of getting connected with agencies and getting connected with folks more quickly, and doing it when we're not in a big disaster, when we have a smaller scale situation, or can talk folks through those things in real time in smaller scale situations where it's less stressful. So and a lot of times we can also help with interoperating between agencies, that they get the same situational awareness picture through the efforts in what we do. If you look at, for example, the hurricane nets that are active, both the Hurricane Watch Net and the VoIP Hurricane Net, these are kind of national type nets we're trying to plug into local and state levels. When we can get that information that's at the local and state level to further flow up into the national level, it provides all those agencies at the different levels to be able to operate in the same manner, and have the same situational awareness picture. And EOC amateur radio operators working and having those relationships established and protocols established with their emergency management directors and such can provide this information from their locations as they see fit. Same thing with non-governmental organizations. For example, we gave the house fire example with the Red Cross in Central Mass from a number of years ago. They're able to share that information. They can get that information to other agencies. For example, the Red Cross responds to the fire. It's in a house or an apartment complex or whatever it is. There are other agencies, church groups, et cetera, that go in and clean up the damage and help support the people victimized by that fire. So they can share that information with other agencies to be able to, again, give them the same situational awareness picture, and also get them involved to help. There is a growing coalition of non-governmental organizations via the volunteer organizations active in disaster, or VOAD, and they're at the state level. There's a Mass VOAD, Connecticut VOAD, and so forth. This is kind of gathering these groups together to share best practices, to know each other ahead of a disaster. Part of what can be shared is our ability to share information with those organizations. The Massachusetts VOAD is actually doing some outreach to the partner organizations to understand what they all do. And from an ARES perspective, in Massachusetts, we're going to be talking with them. And one of the things we'll talk about is our ability to share information on incidents that occur that could necessitate a response from their organizations. Not to mention that we do communications and shelters and other scenarios, and help augment existing communications and are there when communications go down. One more way to kind of sell ourselves to organizations and get them to understand our mission. And so, like we talked about, there's also CERT, Citizen Emergency Response Teams. This is one facet that, a lot of CERT teams are active in actually responding and helping with clearing up an incident or blocking roads. Perhaps a cadre of those folks can also make sure they're reporting out what is happening. to the National Weather Service if it's a weather situation, or to those organizations that need to know that information when they're responding, again, coordinated with their local emergency management folks. And from an amateur radar's perspective, there's a very natural approach for us to be integrated within the CERT teams, learn all those things that CERT teams do, but also provide communications in those areas. And again, we can be a role in not just passing messages, but also sharing situational awareness data across organizations. A lot of times, first responders are very focused on the matter at hand and clearing up that matter on their own, or potentially calling in their own local nearby areas to respond. They don't necessarily get the opportunity to bring that information, even if it's just from a situational awareness perspective, not that they even need assistance, up those chains of management. This is where I think amateur radio can really help with that and provide that communication with the proper coordination with the folks within the agencies that are actually involved in the incident. So now I'm going to share a few situational awareness examples, which we'll definitely spend a few minutes on. So we had this EF0 tornado in Tallinn, Massachusetts, August 2nd, 2020. This was in probably one of the most rural parts of our state. It actually started in the neighboring Berkshire County in Sandusfield, Massachusetts. The first reports of damage came relayed off of public safety in the Tallinn, Mass area and Blandford. We then had an amateur operator, N1LWS, who actually went into the area and got some initial pictures of the damage. Very hard to see at night whether it was tornado or straight line wind damage, but we knew there was definitely damage there, and the cell and the storm, based on radar and other technology, led us to believe that it would be a potential tornadic signature. But we don't know till we gather more data and know the actual damage paths. We had another amateur radio operator. He had taken pictures that night, but went back to the area during the daytime with a drone. He was able to photograph and get areas of the damage and kind of provide all this information. Meantime, the coordination meteorologist, Glenn Field, who was also an amateur operator himself, KB1GHX, was driving out to the area to do the assessment. And he was also doing it for Berkshire County, even though it was for our neighboring Albany Weather Service office. With the amateur operator providing more pictures, video, drone footage, etc., it made the Weather Service's job so much easier to figure out if this was a tornado or not. You can see this was his note to Adam Sullivan, WX4FUN, of how appreciative he was for what we were able to provide for information. He had his own drone. He had an issue with his drone where it got damaged. He still managed to use it. He was amazed with again, this was an extremely rural area, very tough to get around, unpaved back roads with gravel and potholes, as you see him say. But he appreciated the efforts and made for a very thorough survey report that definitely proved we had an EF0 tornado go through this area. So you can see here the damage right here and right here kind of converging on an area, and you can see kind of the twinning pond that was right near part of the path of this tornado. And again, this is where we provide real value to our agencies. We had the initial reports the night before. We had another first amateur radio operator go and get pictures of the damage, at least show us some of the key areas and validate where the heaviest damage was. We had a second amateur operator go out in the daytime, be able to capture the aerial footage while the forecaster who was assigned to the survey was driving out. And then when he to the area, he was able to be pointed to the areas of where to look for the damage. This has happened. This is just one of many examples over the years where we've been able to support our agencies with the initial information and then the follow-up and an additional background to make their job in surveying of a area easier. This is how we provide real value to agencies and what gives amateur radio and Skywarn a real role in the actual work to understand the historical record of what's happening, also help in the warning process, help to show folks these warnings were verified with real damage so that people will take them seriously. It's that whole continuum of how we're able to provide a level of information um, that they may not get from any other method. So here's a second example, and this was from July 22nd of this year. This is a social media post. It's not, and it wasn't hacked or anything. This came right from the fire department of a tornado sighting in Ware. Tornado has appeared to have passed us by. Had a confirmed sighting of a tornado. The station is banned, etc. Well, we did a lot of work on this in Ware in West Brookfield. One of our assistant Skywarn coordinators lives in Ware, Mass. He even got a report of a relayed report from public safety of a tornado touchdown in a specific area. Eric went to the area and we didn't find any damage. We found no damage in the area. We were not able to really find out what's going on. We did find some pockets of wind damage in Ware and in West Brookfield between the efforts of Eric Tuller. We also had amateur operator John Ruggiero, who also works for the Mass State Police, give us some that information, additional information. That was helpful to us to show that we at least had pockets of wind damage, but we could not find anything that showed a well-defined tornadic path. Now, was this problems with what the West Brookfield Fire Department did? I think what happened was there was a funnel cloud. It may have looked like it was touching the ground, but it never really made it fully to the ground, and we were just getting some of the straight line wind damage from the actual severe thunderstorm. So I think that's what was really going on and happening in this scenario. And you know, this went around and a lot of work was done to try to figure out, was there really a tornado path here? But there wasn't. And this was where, again, the additional legwork that we did as an amateur radio operator community and such really gave a full understanding of what was happening in the area. So this was an example of there wasn't that much damage occurring. It was not something that we had to address and go after with more tornado warnings and a signature that was on the ground. It seemed like the heaviest part of the signature stayed aloft and the damage was more isolated. And again, this was another example of us validating a scenario in a different direction. And this was, even though this was from what anybody would think is highly reliable. And again, it wasn't that they were trying to be unreliable. It was just how that was observed, and it was not quite down to the ground fully. Another example of how we play a role in this information. Finally, this is Tropical Storm Isaias and situational awareness. So who you have here is this is Rosti, and his first name, and he is an amateur operator who's part of the American Red Cross Connecticut, Rhode Island region. He was monitoring one of the amateur radio nets that was giving a tremendous amount of damage information, measured wind gust information during Tropical Storm Isaias. The net was fully active for many hours with a lot of data that was sent into our weather service office, was sent around to the different agencies. Rosti was looking for a report specifically around damage to structures, either direct damage from the winds or from fallen trees. Well, not only did we have the whole log of reports, but we also had a number of photos and pictures from amateur operators that was sent in to us. We were able to send all of this information to Rosti for analysis and put in for the damage assessment for the Red Cross. And that goes through the Red Cross. That helps to decide FEMA disaster declarations and so forth. So this is, again, a way of providing additional situational awareness, providing more documentation such that it could potentially affect whether or not a disaster is declared is a full disaster declaration from FEMA or not. And amateur radio played a huge role in this through the efforts of ARES and Skywarn operators that were giving reports that provided additional photos and pictures. So we share them out on our social media for awareness, but it's also being integrated and used by agencies to understand and classify disaster scenarios. So that's just another example. And this was a case where we had literally hundreds of reports and dozens of pictures that we pushed along to Rosti as part of his the situational awareness for the Red Cross and team. So that concludes kind of the formal presentation here, and there's many of other examples that we can get into, and certainly wanted to give a significant amount of time for question, Q&A, and additional discussion here. So, again, this is a walkthrough of situational awareness, some key examples of how it's worked and happened right here in New England. And again, I think there's definitely some additional points we can discuss and other examples that we can talk through here. So I'll turn it over to Jim for questions and other comments.
All right, thanks, Rob. And yeah, definitely great information to share with the community here at large. We do have 105 attendees this evening. Glad everybody's able to join us tonight. I see people from around the country, so well represented. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for Rob, please put them in the Q&A box. That's our best way of queuing those up and getting those answered. We do have a bunch of questions that have already come in. We'll get to those in a moment. If time permits, there is the raise hand feature within Zoom, which you can also do, and we will try to ask some questions live if technology and time permits. But for the time being, we're going to focus on the Q&A box. We've had a couple of questions, Rob, about if your slides would be available. We know the webinar is being recorded and will be available, but specifically the slides, if those are things that would be available.
Yep, so we can definitely make the slides available to all, in addition to just the actual recording and presentation. Just credit myself and Jim for the presentation, but other than that, I have no problem making the slides available.
Okay, great. Next question goes to a very good friend, very local friend, Dave, N1VSI. Hi, Dave. How do you coordinate activities that go across state lines, area sections, et cetera, for larger events, weather, earthquakes, et cetera?
Yeah, so from a weather situation, we definitely have worked. We have had excellent cooperation of the section managers and section emergency coordinators of the different states. They work with us to appoint the Skywarn coordinators for the parts of state, for the parts of the state that we cover from a weather service perspective. They work with us to help establish the policies that should be applied for the coverage areas. And they work with us as if there's no section or border that they're there, but it's just making sure everybody's in the loop and incorporated with each other. So we set the policies. Everybody's all in the loop on those said policies, and we don't have any issues with folks not being coordinated. And it's worked out extremely well for many years now, and it's really been I can't say enough about the cooperation across New England. Even if we're have different weather service offices involved, that not necessarily we get reports for other weather service offices, we're able to just seamlessly send them the information, and sometimes we find and the SCCs will say, if you can't get the information to one office, get it to ours or the others, to make sure the information is moved around correctly. So that has worked out extremely well. During earthquakes, the policy that kind of happens there is it really goes into the U.S. Geological Survey. They have forms that can be used to fill in that information. The Weather Service does sometimes issue earthquake reports, kind of in collaboration with USGS. But eventually, it's really the Geological Service that answers to a lot of that information around earthquakes. But given the fact that weather spotters are so dispersed in the area, oftentimes when earthquakes occur, more rare as they are here in New England, a lot of the data about what's felt and any damage can come from a number of folks. And we've actually put out calls for that information in those scenarios, and have gotten quite a bit of feedback from spotters even in that situation. So I think I answered Dave's question, and we've got plenty of time for more here.
All right, thanks, Robin. Yeah, we did just get a whole bunch more questions in, so please keep them coming. We're getting them queued as quick as we can. Next question comes from James. This question is about, he had CB radios before he got his license. Does ARES also monitor CB band during emergencies? I know CB bands are quiet out here in NE.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes monitoring CB can be helpful to the truckers that still have that equipment. It's not as popular certainly as it was in the 70s or 80s, but it certainly can be monitored. There are still organizations such as REACT that can do not just CB, that was kind of originally based around CB, but now it can have an amateur radio component, can have a GMRS component in addition to CB, and there are a few of those groups active even in New England that can be out there and do some of that monitoring for situational awareness purposes.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Bill. What about a low power radio station for information during an emergency transmit on AM or FM radio frequency to be heard on your car radio or portable radio? I can take a stab at part of that before sending it to Rob. So I work in community media, and our city north of Boston has an AM 1640 radio station, which is called a Traveler's Information Station. It's an AM radio station for emergency use, specific to travel. So some communities may have those resources in place, but from a amateur radio perspective, let me send it over to Rob. What do you got the thoughts on that?
So certainly there are communities that have that information and have those setups. Basically, and obviously it's just outside of our 160 meter ham band that some folks have access to. So that's another example of being able to get information in and being able to utilize that and kind of coalesce it into a one-way broadcast. So it certainly can be helpful, especially when you start losing a lot more infrastructure due to power outages and communication outages.
Okay, and our next question, it's a two-part question, comes from Les. How many linked repeaters exist in your regions, and how far do the linked repeaters cover, and how have they helped?
So a lot of the Skywarn activity is not on linked repeaters, although we have leveraged the MMRA system at times for ARES and Skywarn, and there's probably up to a dozen linked repeaters that cover Eastern Mass. Out in Western Mass, it's more individual repeaters versus linked repeaters. In Connecticut, from a Skywarn perspective, it's been more localized repeaters, though they do have a link system that links the whole state. How much linking is there? I'm not sure. I know up in Maine, there's the KQ1L system that is a pretty large link system. In Rhode Island, you have the KD1CY system that can link up the state, and we do use that from a Skywarn perspective for coverage in Rhode Island. So it varies across the different parts of New England, and I don't know all of the states and what they do for linking completely, but those are some examples from the states that I do know about.
Okay, and the next question comes from our very good friend Blake, who's joining us this evening. Says, nice job tonight. How do you vet a claim from a field operator to the served agency in a real-time scenario?
Yeah, so I mean, in a situation where we're getting the reports from actually monitored off public safety, it's really about making sure we heard the reporting, either that the reporting parties on scene and that's what they reported, or that we hear other public safety is on scene, or it's very clear that what occurred is actually what's happened. If it's a firsthand report from the person, a lot of times we try to get them to grab pictures right on the spot. um, Obviously for weather station information, we sometimes will ask information around the equipment. So those are some of the preliminary things that we do, and then certainly can always have a second person take a look at the area when it's needed, particularly in for larger, higher end type of incidents where there could be a greater concern for whether the report is accurate or not.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Fran. Is there a template that can be used for situational awareness to make reports more uniform and consistent?
So certainly from a Skywarn perspective, there's the time of the event type, the location of view, and the location of the event. So the tell principle, that applies, I think, in other types of reporting. There's certainly a template of, the location, the city, town, the state, the street location. It can be just the street name or sometimes the address, but sometimes people don't want to necessarily give their specific address. And then the actual what occurred, and really just about what you're seeing. So, that there's multiple trees down, it's from some type of high wind. Don't necessarily have to figure out if it's a microburst or a tornado. That comes later. If it's an earthquake situation, is a different example. What kind of damage occurred? Cracked windows, some type of structural damage, and just do your best to describe what you're seeing for the damage. And obviously, if in this day and age with technology, getting pictures of the damage and sending that along gives a very good feel for what's happening, even more so than the actual verbal um, detail of the situation, other than the actual location of the event if it's not tagged in the picture.
Sure. And Fran asks, where would you find these templates?
So certainly the Skywarn slides have some of that information. If you look at some of the reporting web forms that are out there, whether you could go to voipwx.net and check out our reporting form, those templates are very similar, or the weather service reporting form. Those templates are fairly similar in nature.
Okay, our next question comes from Dwayne. What is your frequency of interfacing with support organizations, Skywarn, Red Cross, etc.? Well, we know how Southern New England goes, Rob, so I know the Skywarn program is extremely active, but why don't you dive into that one a little bit, please?
Well, so I think, if you look across New England, I mean, I think, certainly you have the Gray Main Skywarn program, which is they have a reasonably sized program. There's some activity up in the Caribou office. Our office is probably leading the way in New England, but we're working with the other areas to bolster their programs. In Massachusetts, Skywarn is a big driver of a lot of the public service and emergency communications, along with actual public service events, which obviously have taken a major hit because of COVID. So it is really the biggest driver of what goes on for public service and emergency communications. And I think it's what keeps us viable for the bigger scenarios where we actually have to activate and go farther. It's been a while since we've had a true mobilization for either shelter communications and such that's outside of a local level. So, for example, we did have some activity on Cape Cod for the tornadoes in 2019 outside of the Skywarn activity, so supporting the EOC and some shelter communications. similar situation in 2013 with a blizzard down on the Cape, and that was actually a case where a few outside resources from outside the Cape assisted. Most of the time, the Cape has been able to handle the situations on their own. You really have to go back to the 2008 ice storm for a more larger scale Aries map, where we had hams coming in from the eastern Mass section to western Mass to Gardner and a few of the locations in Worcester County to assist with things. There probably are similar stories from that ice storm up in New Hampshire and Maine. So and this is why I say it's so important to embrace this as a means of public service communications, because the other higher scale incidents, they can happen, and they do happen. And there's a few examples that I've already mentioned, but they don't happen on a every few month basis. It's really more like an every few year basis. So we spend a lot of time training, and we say, well, are we ever going to actually have an incident? Well, there's a lot of cases with type of communications we're talking about for smaller scale weather situations to the larger ones, where there is a great way to practice and stay connected and in tune. And that allows us to go into further, deeper operations for bigger events, whether they be weather or otherwise. Certainly from my perspective, a lot of this work that we did here was very helpful. Being with the medical coordinator for the 2013 marathon bombings. And by the way, from the situational awareness perspective, FEMA and other agencies were monitoring the amateur radio bands to get a sense of situational awareness in that situation as well.
Okay, excellent. And again, just a reminder, anybody that has any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We get about another 15 to 20 minutes to go. We have 3 questions in the queue, but plenty of time for more. And if time permits, we'll try to do some interactive stuff. So next question comes from Dave again, N1BSI. Hi, Dave. How do you see DMR impacting how we communicate as it becomes more common?
So it's definitely something that we'll be getting more engaged with. The biggest problem with being more engaged with it is analog is the kind of least common denominator. It's everybody has it, whereas DMR is a specific setup that less folks have. So having the additional capability with DMR, we definitely want to embrace it and start using it. Until that becomes kind of that everybody has it, it's going to be hard for it to fully replace everything. I do think it's going to have its place and its role, and it's something that we're going to be looking at getting more active with in the coming months. And there's plenty of other digital modes, and the Aries Academy's covered a lot of that, WinLink, NBEMS, etc. Those are other modes that we want to get more familiar with, and that also allows for faster data transmission because it's handled digitally and not by voice. But there will always be voice for the quicker messaging, the most critical messaging, because it's the most readily available thing out there. But the digital modes are great when doing the massive data flow that you can get from like a strong tropical storm or hurricane, where data is coming in almost faster than you can process it.
Okay, we have another question from Les. Have your members set up a list of local non-Aries races repeaters in which you can announce emergencies and activations?
So repeat that one more time, Jim.
Certainly. Question from Les. Have your members set up a list of local non-Aries races repeaters in which you can announce emergencies and activations?
That's a good point. I mean, I'm sure we know of a lot of those out there, but I'm not sure we've necessarily thought of a list or to actually announce these things and get people to come to the areas that are staffed for those events. So I think that's a good point to capture and make sure that we factor into plans as we, when those situations occur.
Okay, excellent. And sorry for little connection difficulties there. Don't have the fastest internet at home, but it's working with what we got. Next point comes from Dave, WA1ZCN. Having worked in the New Hampshire State EOC through a number of events, I would suggest first asking an agency what kind of information they need and from where before feeding them anything that's not a true emergency. Otherwise, the folks at the EOC are left to sort out what's valuable and what's not. It can be like drinking from a fire hose, not helpful in a busy EOC. Some interesting points there, Rob.
No, and Dave's absolutely right. So I can tell you that with mass emergency management, what they have wanted is, and we've asked them, we'd asked them, from a Skywarn perspective, we get hundreds of reports. Is that really helping you? Is it too much information? Is it too granular? But they've actually wanted that information at that granular level. And I think part of it is because it's digital and and it's not necessarily by voice, and they can kind of skim through it and kind of glean out the higher level points. And that's why it's important to kind of understand, and to Dave's point, what's needed up front. Same thing here, with Rosty's request, I want, he basically said, look, I have your whole list. It's great. Focus now on just damage to structures. So then we narrowed the focus to damage to structures, either but direct damage from the winds or by fallen trees on those locations. And that was very helpful in fine tuning the request so that they had the information that they needed. And we were able to kind of filter down that information to what the agency was requesting. So I think that's an excellent point, and something that we've factored in these relationships and these examples that we've shared tonight.
Okay, and the next question comes from Fran, and a very interesting question at that. So Rob, you might want to put your thinking hat on for this one. Could situational awareness apply to monitoring the compliance and non-compliance of COVID-19 protocols, such as wearing masks, coming upon large groups that could spread, etc.? This would provide extra eyes and ears on the ground for the enforcement persons who are out there to protect the whole community. Just wonder if there might be a role for those with situational awareness skills. Thanks.
Well, I think it is. I mean, if you look at it, with the marathon, COVID's another example. It's if you see something, say something, right? That's what they've always said. So again, it has to be an established protocol for where and how to pass that information to. But that is another example of creating situational awareness, but having those channels and what they want communicated defined ahead of time.
Okay, so that does bring us to the end of what we had queued up for Q&A. So I'm going to announce a couple of things. One, again, if you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Michael, you're welcome. Glad to be presenting for you this evening. So if you have any more questions, please use the Q&A box and we'll get those answered. I got some coming in right now. Once we're done with the Q&A, what we'll do is if you want to use the raise hand feature located on your screen, time permits after these next couple of questions, what we'll do is have you ask a question live, and we'll give that a go. But our next question comes from Steve, follow up with Les's question from earlier. Do you use PACE plans for frequency use, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency? Do you find this useful or overkill?
So one more time with that question, Jim.
This is from Steve. It's a follow-up on Les's question. Do you use PACE plans for frequency use, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency? Do you find this useful or overkill?
So I have to be honest, we have not used that, but maybe as we look at kind of what Les's suggestion was, we could look at what, would that principle that's being mentioned be something that we wanted to utilize. So appreciate mentioning that. And sorry, I don't have a better answer there, but it's something I think we can think about in terms of Les's original comment.
Yeah, and that's the first I've heard of the PACE acronym. I think that's definitely something useful and might be worth looking at down the road a little bit. Again, we've answered all the questions. Paul in Pennsylvania, definitely you're welcome. Again, glad to be here this evening presenting for you. So we'll pause again if anybody has any questions, and also at this time, if you want to use the raise hand feature and ask a question live, we can do that. We know there is a little bit of a delay, so we'll kind of pause, but got about 10 more minutes left in the evening. If we don't have any other questions, we can certainly end a little bit early. Bob K1YO says, thanks, nice job. Important to pre-establish relationships with agencies and our ARES teams here in Western Mass to find out, like Rob mentioned, exactly what kind of info they need so we can tailor our resources to that. So message is definitely being heard this evening, Rob.
And I appreciate that, Bob, and I appreciate Dave's comment here, and glad everybody enjoyed the presentation. I did kind of make it a relatively shorter one because I think oftentimes one thing I've heard in sessions, especially when you only have an hour, is you want to leave time for questions, maybe left a few more extra minutes here, but I think it's very important to have more, also have the kind of topic, but also have more of a dialogue. And doing some workshops at hurricane conferences and whatever, a lot of times we've always run up right near that end of time frame, and the biggest feedback we've gotten back is wish we had more time for Q&A and interaction. So for tonight, wanted to kind of give that block of Q&A and interaction. And I certainly got a couple of comments from folks that, we'll take back into looking at our own operations. And that's, I'm saying it from an Eastern Mass ARES perspective and a Southern New England Skywarn perspective, but even other SECs and folks here on the presentation, I think may have gotten some interesting comments, some of the interesting comments from folks looking at how to look at that in their operations as well.
Okay, excellent. And we have another question, which I think I'm going to kind of broaden it out a little bit. And we kind of touched on this a little earlier. Could Skywarn be a model for some COVID-19 related communications tasks? What do you think, Rob, there? Anything we could do to help? I think EDS kind of comes to mind, where there might be some communications needs there.
Yeah, so certainly, so I think two things. One is like Fran mentioned, some, around any kind of serious or widespread infractions around some of the COVID protocols, with large gatherings or lack of masks in places where you can't be socially distant, or things of that nature may be, very, very helpful. Certainly through just our regular, we have some parts of the area, we have regular ARES and also Skywarn Nets giving updates on just what's the latest with the virus and what's happening and such. How are the numbers looking, et cetera, right? We're kind of going through what's probably this second surge of the virus with the cooler temperatures, people going back indoors, the virus spread being more prevalent during the colder weather months, because the virus can survive longer than in the warmth. Just passing that information along and letting folks know, and everybody's tired of this, right? I think everybody loves being on Zoom to be able to do presentations like tonight, but I also think people miss the actual face-to-face interactions, as well, but just trying to keep each other informed and also connected in different ways until we can get on to the other side of this thing, I think is helpful. So not only just warning each other and providing that situational awareness, but also providing that social connectivity. And the jokes around bound about amateur radio being socially distant since it was born. So but it keeps everybody I think physically distant but socially connected. And I think that's another thing that can come out of all this, is by doing some of this work, we remain socially connected with one another, even though we may not be physically connected.
Yeah, well said, for sure. I mean, normally we'd be getting ready for our fall Skywarn coordinators meeting in Southern New England, where, as Rob knows, I usually give him a birthday present or 3 or 6 or things to add to his collection. And I guess we're just gonna have to hold what I have for this year for next year, make it a double birthday.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's a lot of things, right? The Boston Marathon is not happening in April. It will happen in the fall of 2021 at the earliest. And will it be virtual? We don't even know that right now. So, it's just part of what we're in right now. I think hopefully by latter part of 21 and into 2022, it'll be different. But I also think we're going to have a better balance of when we can get together physically, but also do more sessions like these where it's easier sometimes to get together from the comfort of your home and have a training or discussion like this versus physically getting together. But I'm sure when we're able to do that again, at first, everybody's going to want to get physically together again because it's been so long, and that will definitely be a healthy thing.
Exactly. And, Skywarn Recognition Day is coming up, and that's going to look a lot different. And, I might have to have a lot of Cane's Donuts on our end here, which is a local donut shop, just to make up for what we usually do at the weather office. I got a bunch more people just saying thank you. Thanks from Florida. Thanks from South Carolina. Again, you're welcome. Glad you were all able to join us. We have just a few more minutes in this presentation. We'll be ending at 8:30. So one more call for questions. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. In the meantime, just want to remind everybody about the next session that's coming up in the New England Division ARES Academy. It's the final scheduled session on October 31st, this Saturday at 9 a.m., working with served agencies panel discussion. That is available at the hamexposition.org website, where you can get the Zoom information for that. Again, that's Saturday, October 31st from 9 to 11, working with served agencies panel discussion. So one more question, where can I find this presentation on YouTube? I believe the Northeast Ham Exposition group has a YouTube page that's set up. We're posting those as they come in. So definitely check them out and you'll be able to find the presentation there. So as we begin to wrap up, again, thanks to everybody for joining us. The question, who will be on the panel on Saturday? And that's going to be Justin Cates, KB3JUV, who's the moderator of that session on Saturday. So I do see a lot of people, again, just saying thanks. Glad you're all able to join us this evening. And to those that are able to come on Saturday, hope to see you there. Dave, WA1ZCN, says the New England ARES Academy YouTube channel is where you can find those videos. So that being said, wish all of you the best. Thanks for joining us this evening. Rob, any closing comments?
Well, just thanks to everybody for joining. It was a great crowd in here tonight, including some from outside of New England. Glad everybody learned something. Glad everyone enjoyed it. It was great to have the interactions through Q&A, and we'll catch everyone again soon, and hope folks can join in for the panel discussion and on Saturday, and join the remaining couple sessions of the ARES Academy, and we'll catch everyone maybe on the air.
Awesome. So thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great night. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you all next time. Have a great night.